Welcome once again to Jesus and Our Mental Health as we are talking about something that's quite difficult, and that is changing the way we react or respond to the world around us by changing the way we think. Now, you and I both know in the culture that we're in now, people are always talking about their truth, their truth, their truth. There's a great revelation in that statement. It means that psychologically they have repeated something to themselves enough times where they have established a truth. Now, those of us that are believers know that Jesus has talked about the truth versus a truth, the truth versus some facts. We know in the environment that we are living now, facts used to be something you could depend upon. But now we live in a time of alternate facts where a fact is just what you believe at the time. If you believe it emotionally enough and say it enough time, even if it's wrong, if you say it over and over again, if it's enough times, it becomes truth or it becomes fact. So and that's a strategy that we're experiencing in politics today, and many of our lives. If we repeat something enough times, people will begin to believe it. It falls right into the neuroplasticity of our minds, in that whatever truth is repeated to us, and whatever truth, more importantly, we repeat to ourselves, whatever fact, whatever belief we repeat to ourselves, our mind believes that is true. So the last time we were together, I asked you a very personal question. What have you been saying to yourself over the span of years that has become so embedded in your thinking that it's difficult for you to move outside the arena of that thinking? That you start to believe that not only do you believe it, but everybody else should, and that we made it more personal. What have you been saying to yourself, about yourself, to yourself about others, to yourself about yourself and to others, that has now become a truth to you? The Bible is clear that our minds can be renovated. It can be renewed. Scientists have proven that in the Lord's genius and God's genius in His creativity, He made our minds neuroplastic, meaning your mind can actually be trained to change the way it processes information. Jesus comes along in the New Testament, says, the book of Philippians, I believe, says, think on these things. Falls right into the truth that I shared with you the last time we were together. Whatever you repeat to yourself 7 times, your mind will begin to believe it's true. So let's take, for instance, the Bible says, think on lovely things. Now, this challenges a lot of us because a lot of our attitudes about life and about ourselves are negative based on what we've been exposed to repeatedly. More importantly, what we have said to ourselves. Some of you may have had a rough upbringing and had parents that were hypercritical. I know several people who grew up in a parenting household where no and you can't do something were the standard conversations. So children grow up thinking that they can't do much in life, or they get to a point in life where they rebel, but they overreact to the fact that they came out of a negative environment. So all of a sudden you start to see the world as a big no, as a big rejection, as a major problem in life, that you can't get ahead. And you'll start to feel it first, but then you'll silently, quietly have conversation with yourself. My family never makes it. I'll never make it. Those kinds of self-defeating statements that we have, and maybe some of us still do, say to ourselves. The problem with that is you cannot control an initial thought, but you can control your response to it. You actually can decide, okay, that sounds crazy. I remember one of the times in my own life when, I began to admit to myself that my thought process was not helping me. Now, the reason that I was able to get there in my thinking was because I kept analyzing the results. When you're thinking this way, Dave, How come it always turns out this way? Now, of course, the first thing I would do is situationalize my thinking. So that was a Monday. This one was made on a Tuesday. This one was made on a Wednesday. You know what I'm saying? The circumstance was different, but the thought was the same. So I would eliminate the fact that my thinking was wrong and the outcome was the problem. I know I just landed in some of your living rooms. So watch what I would do. It wasn't how I was approaching the thing. It was that the result didn't work out. So it was the result's problem, not mine. Let's simplify it. It is not your job to understand me. It is my job to make sure you understand me. Immature communicators will say something like this, especially in spiritual disciplines. That word was over their head. They didn't fail as listeners. You failed as a speaker. What? Yes. A lot of times what we like to do is blame the failure on the receiver and not take any responsibility as the giver. And this is how a lot of people operate. Now, how did they get there? Because this negativity that you may have talked yourself into after all these years will not allow us to see ourselves as partially responsible for a thing failing. But God says in His Word, that part of your mind can be renovated, can be renewed, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So the Bible also tells us in the New Testament, not only think on those things that are lovely. In other words, start looking for that which is good and stop specializing in negativity. Now, I have people around me very close to me that, and I hate to say this, but it's true, I don't normally call them for balanced advice. But if I want to hear the negativity connected to a thing, if I want to hear criticism of a thing or a person, I'll ask them, what do you think about so-and-so? If I want to have a conversation where they are interacting, I'll talk about a negative situation, either politics or in sports or in life. And they're very forthcoming in those conversations. But if, you know some people like this, but if you start talking about so-and-so graduated at the top of their class, so-and-so's children got a full scholarship to school, that kind of thing, there's very little or no enthusiasm at all. Why? Because they convinced themselves to the point that nothing is lovely. And the only thing that's true is a negative outcome. That's not going to work. Every man is a dog. Every woman is crazy. You know those kind of people. So what has to happen? The Bible tells us I've got to take advantage of the neuroplasticity of my mind. That means that you can change with the help of the Lord the way you think. Now watch this. How do I do that? Well, things that are true. Now this is a tough one. The truth versus my truth are not always the same. The truth of the Lord versus my truth, not always the same. Someone does something wrong to me, He says, forgive them. My truth says, get back at them. So God's truth allows me to get past what offended me. My truth causes me to stay completely submerged in what's bothering me. Now, the problem with this mindset is, if what was done to me is absolutely true, I feel like I have a right to be angry. But you don't have a right to stay that way. Now, how do I say that? Well, yes, I do. Yes, I do. Because you will stay trapped in an offense that's 10, 15, 20, 30 years old, which means not only were you offended, but you were stopped. Wait a minute, I don't understand that, Pastor. Because that thing that you won't let go of, that you won't think differently about, has you trapped in a time, trapped in an era, trapped in a mindset. Watch this. To where every time you hear about that person or you see another person, you start to apply your hurt or your offense, your truth to that person who knows nothing about you, that situation that has nothing to do with you. So our minds have to be renewed. There's got to be a change. There's got to be a transformation. Or we stay trapped, watch this, in the era of our offense. So in order for us to begin to think differently, Jesus gives us instructions in His Word. His Word says, whatever things are lovely, true, of any good report, think on these things. Now, if you missed the last video, I'm going to remind you of this, and I want you to do some homework. I want you to think of the top 3 negative things that you continually say to yourself. I want you to think of the top 3 positive things, watch this, that are true, not wishes. I don't want anybody. I saw a tape the other day, and you know, I counsel a lot of people on relationships, and I saw this tape, and this young man and this woman, they had met, and she was asking him all these qualifying questions. You know, and you know, the big thing now is, what do you bring to the table? So he was telling her about his business, about how he, you know, how he had a child and how he was a good dad and what he did for his child. And his child lived with him, and he went right down the aisle, right down the list, you know. And, you know, he was the right height. You know, she was saying, you know, you're a good height, and, you know, what kind of money do you make? And he, you know, he went through all of that. Had a 6-figure income, just everything that's on a lot of people's lists as to who you should be. Well, then she finally took a breath from asking questions, and he said, well, let me ask you a question. What do you bring to the table? And after she asked for all this substance, do you know what she said? She said, I am the table. I almost threw my shoe at the television. What do you mean? What has she been telling herself? That you're going to need all of this, but my presence is going to be enough for you. And then when he said, what do you mean by that? She started naming things that weren't really going to matter to him. Well, I'm a pleasant person. Well, I'm a, you know, well, all that is good. All that's pleasant. But based upon what she asked, all she was willing to bring was some attitude. I'll make you laugh. I was astounded. What am I saying? What had she been saying to herself that gave her the impression that I'm enough and you're not enough? And watch this, that my perception of you, my perspective on you should be enough for you. How did that happen? You got to sit around and tell yourself a number of times until you believe it. And watch this, and then expect others to receive or accept what you're saying you believe is your truth. So what does God say? He says, number 1, I've made you in reflection of me, image and likeness. Number 2, I've made you to be Christ-like, have the characteristics of Christ. I've made you to have fruit of the Spirit. In other words, obvious characteristics that are never out of season. So he says, what I need you to do is get your mind renovated, start thinking differently, set up a new way of thinking. And in order to do that, you've got to think on these things. Whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are really the truth. I hope this helps. I need some of you guys to write me. Now, don't forget the assignment now. 3 things that you've been saying to yourself for years that are negative. 3 things that you've been saying to yourself for years that are positive. And then here's the addition to the assignment. Which of those has dominated your life? The positive things have to be true, not wishes. not the way you want to see things, not I am the table. Okay? Not a man saying, I'm a man, that should be enough. No. I want you to think on not just the negative, but think on the positive, and which one outweighs the other. I can't wait to see you again. Thanks for joining me on Jesus and Your Mental Health.